President Biden today said that the U.S. military will get involved militarily if China invades its island neighbor. This is how the president answered a reporter's question this morning at a joint news conference in Tokyo with Japan's new prime minister.
You didn't want to get involved in the Ukraine conflict militarily for obvious reasons. Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's a commitment we made.
Shortly after that news conference, the White House seemingly tried to clarify President Biden's remarks, writing in a statement, quote, "The president reiterated our commitment to peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and to provide Taiwan with a military means to defend itself." So a clarification there, Joe, from the White House.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I suppose people would be making a big deal out of this today. But Richard Haass, we're involved militarily in Ukraine. Our troops aren't in Ukraine. He didn't say we were going into Ukraine. I think it was the right answer. We've had strategic ambiguity with China for years. It's done us, of late, very little good. And so the fact that he didn't hesitate the same way Donald Trump hesitated for months when asked whether we would honor our NATO commitments, I think a good thing. And I think the White House going back in saying, well, our troops wouldn't go in. Well, that's, that's fine. But we're going to be involved militarily, standing up anybody who invades Taiwan, right?
Right. We should be. It's the third time the president said it. It's the third time the White House staff has walked it back. And the White House staff should stand down. This is the right thing to do. Unlike in Europe, our allies and partners in Asia not only want us to do this, Joe, to get directly involved on behalf of Taiwan, they expect it. And if the United States does not get directly involved on behalf of Taiwan, Taiwan cannot do a Ukraine. Taiwan's an island. You can't get resupply in there. It has no ability for serious self-defense. So we either get directly involved in Taiwan, which will bring Japan and others in, or China will own Taiwan all too easily. So this is the right thing to do. And at stake is the alliance system that for 3/4 of a century has made Asia the single most successful part of the world. So I think the president is exactly right. And as he pointed out, you can move to strategic clarity to say we're going to do this without in any way undermining the so-called one China policy and the framework of U.S.-Chinese relations that, again, has worked for over 4 decades.
Well, it's worked for 4 decades. Again, China's become far more aggressive militarily over the past decade. Some would say over the past 20 years. And so, yeah, there are concerns. And listen, there are many times that Joe Biden makes gaffes and they have to walk those gaffes back. But it reminds me of something that was said earlier in the Ukrainian conflict. There are times, Richard Haass, and we've talked about this, there are times where a little strategic ambiguity goes a long way. We talked about it before when Biden was far more forceful. The White House walked back some of his statements. But that's something that keeps Vladimir Putin guessing. And this is something that I don't think keeps China guessing. I believe China understands after Ukraine the consequences of invading Taiwan. And if it's something they were thinking about doing, if they had it on their to-do list in 2022, I think that's been moved off quite a bit because what they've seen. I think the president throwing a brushback pitch here, also a very good thing.
I agree. And again, I think moving to clarity, as the president did, deterrence by clarity is better than deterrence by ambiguity. It's much more certain. I think you're right. China's not going to do this soon. I think they're a bit taken aback by the extent of the sanctions against Russia. And ultimately, China is much more of an investing, trading nation than is Russia. Also, China's taken the message that they need to build up their nuclear weapons, Joe. One of the things we've inadvertently done in the crisis here against Ukraine is when the president says we're not going to start World War III and all that, China takes that as a message saying we, China, have to build up our nuclear weapons so the United States will exercise caution. And what the president did, I think, here says, yeah, we're going to be careful, but we understand how important this is. We understand the stakes. And you, China, should really basically operate under the assumption that the United States will get directly involved on behalf of Taiwan. This is not exactly the same thing as Ukraine, given the stakes, given the geography. So I actually think this is a significant and welcome strategic announcement by this president.
And there is no doubt that our allies across Asia obviously are going to be cheered on by this, Jonathan Lemire. There has been a question whether the United States was going to stand up for its allies, whether the United States was going to stand up for its interests. Obviously, Asia has been growing more and more concerned over the past several years about how aggressive China has become militarily and economically and in every other way. So I would guess that, again, our allies in Asia would be cheering this on, even as the White House tries to round off, let's say, some of the rough diplomatic edges.
So that's, first of all, such a stark contrast in the approach to the region from what we saw under former President Trump. You're right. We have seen this before from the White House. The president will say something where it feels like he's perhaps getting out ahead of the administration policy. The White House walks it back, sort of. But this one feels pretty calculated, that he said this in a way that was a message to China. There's some ambiguity here meant to sort of keep China on their toes. And I think that there's certainly growing concern in that region about China's growing strength. And that's what this whole trip has been about. The meeting of the Quad coming up, the India, Australia, Japan, and the U.S., with South Korea also taking a more pro-U.S. approach. This new economic partnership that was unveiled today, short on the details, but certainly meant to increase economic cooperation in the region to also be a bulwark to China's growth. And also, I think this is telling, Joe, on this show and obviously on, in corridors of power throughout Washington, there's sort of been this comparison, this whispered comparison between the situation between Ukraine and Russia and China and Taiwan. Well, today, President Biden flat out said it. He was explicit in saying this. I'll just read it real quick. Biden added that deterring China from attacking Taiwan was one of the reasons why it's so important that Russia's President Putin, quote, pay a dear price for his barbarism in Ukraine, because lest China and any other nations get the idea that this is acceptable. So Biden sort of saying the quiet part out loud there and say, hey, we're hammering Russia as hard as we possibly can with sanctions, not just to punish them, but to act as a deterrent that China won't do the same. And he also added that even as the war winds down at some point in Russia, Ukraine, whatever that might be, he left open the idea that a lot of these sanctions will stay in place. A further warning to China that if you were to go to Taiwan, the sanctions we put against you would also be for years to come.